It's time now for the World Brief and a review of some of the headlines from today's newspapers from around the world. But as ever, let's begin with the World Brief. Let me tell you what's happening around the world. Now, in the latest twist following the coup declared in Guinea-Bissau, Nigeria has granted asylum to Fernando Diaz da Costa, who is the Guinea-Bissau's opposition presidential candidate. Now, reports say that Diaz had received threats to his life after last week's coup. He was a close rival in the election, the results of which have not been declared. The coup itself has been the subject of conspiracy theories that suggest deposed President Umaru Sissoco Embalu was behind the military takeover, which has handed power to a close ally of his. Now, Nigeria has condemned the takeover and calls for an immediate return to constitutional order. Well, staying in Africa, Nduduzile Zuma Sambudla, she's the daughter of former President Jacob Zuma. She has resigned from the National Assembly after allegations that she, together with two unidentified accomplices, lured 17 South African men to Russia under the guise of security trading contracts, only for them to be forced into fighting against Ukraine. At the same time, 5 South Africans, including SAFM radio presenter Nonkululeko Mantula and 4 others aged between 21 and 47 years old, have appeared in court on charges of recruiting men to fight for Russia in Ukraine. President Cyril Ramaphosa's office confirmed an investigation into how 17 men who are trapped in eastern Ukraine and the government has pledged efforts to repatriate them back to South Africa. Well, US President Donald Trump has Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro. He has asked him to step down immediately, warning that refusal could lead to US military intervention. Now, the conversation between the two presidents comes amid more naval deployments in the Caribbean and repeated accusations that Maduro's government fuels drug trafficking and threatens regional stability. Now, Trump himself has reportedly offered Maduro safe passage for himself, his family, and close allies if he voluntarily relinquishes power. Unconfirmed reports say Maduro demands global amnesty for any crimes and insists on retaining control of Venezuela's armed forces. Now, this conversation took place during a phone call between the two leaders. Venezuela's foreign ministry says the United States is seeking to seize Venezuela's oil reserves. Meanwhile, the White House has confirmed US Admiral Frank Bradley, not Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, gave an order to kill everybody with a second round of military strikes on an alleged Venezuelan drug boat. Now, moving on, a court in Bangladesh has convicted Labour MP Tulip Siddique, the niece of former Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina, and sentenced her to 2 years in prison and an $800 fine. Though the trial was held in absentia and without Siddique having a lawyer present, the judge ruled that she had used her influence over her aunt to help her mother, Sheikh Rahana, and her siblings obtain a plot of land in the Bangladesh capital, Dhaka. Siddique strongly denied the charges, saying that she's never held a Bangladeshi passport after childhood, she's never even paid any taxes in Bangladesh, and that the whole process was flawed and farcical. Her Labour Party says it cannot recognise the judgment because she was not given a chance to defend herself, and the United Kingdom has no extradition treaty with Bangladesh, so she's unlikely to serve the sentence. Meanwhile, former Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina received a 5-year sentence in the same case, while her sister Rahana got 7 years. 14 other defendants were each given 5-year terms. Well, before we come over for conversation, let's include in our conversation the newspaper headlines. Let's take a look at the newspaper headlines from today. As ever, we begin with the front page of This Day. And This Day leads with the Nigerian Upstream Petroleum Regulatory Commission opening the 2025 oil and gas licensing round, offering 50 blocks and targeting $10 billion in investment. The new digital two-stage bidding process is designed to boost production, create jobs, and enhance transparency with improved geological data, reducing exploration risks. It is Tuesday, and Tuesday means that we get the legal insert into This Day, which includes The Advocate by Onikepo Braithwaite. This week, she critiques the government's handling of insecurity, faulting officials such as Idris Wase for prioritizing VIP protection, as well as the defense minister for defeatist remarks. She also goes on to argue that insecurity persists due to weak political will, not weak laws. Well, moving on to the New Telegraph this morning, it reports that Defense Minister Badaru has resigned, citing ill health amid rising attacks and worsening insecurity nationwide. Now, his exit comes as communities face persistent banditry, kidnapping and terror incidents. To the Daily Sun, which highlights Enugu State Governor Peter Mba's expanded security initiative, deploying 2 high-tech drones, 10 patrol vans, 40 motorbikes and 400 bulletproof vests and helmets to strengthen surveillance in high-risk border communities with Benue and Kogi. Now, the day and night vision drones aim to curb kidnappings and violent crimes as part of a broader protection strategy. The Daily Trust this morning leads with growing insecurity in the north, reporting that Kano has become the new frontier for bandit attacks. Frequent raids and abductions are also spreading into rural communities in that state. The Punch reports that northern governors and traditional rulers have called for a 6-month suspension of mining and announced a 228 billion naira security fund to tackle banditry and kidnapping. They've endorsed state policing, they've urged for stronger collaboration with federal forces, and they've also stressed urgent action to secure schools and vulnerable communities. Well, the Vanguard this morning does report on a major shake-up in the FCT where over 1,095 Abuja plots had been revoked by Minister Nyesom Wike. Those affected include former First Lady Patience Jonathan, former APC Chairman Abdullahi Ganduje, former Cross River State Governor Donald Duke, and former Ekiti Governor Ayo Fayose, as well as many others. Now, the FCT administration is moving to reclaim lands declared improperly or allocated or misallocated or abandoned. The Daily Independent reports that Nigeria's economy grew by 3.98% in the third quarter of this year, 2025, and that was driven by agriculture, ICT, financial services, trade and real estate. To UK papers, let's take a look at the Financial Times, which also covers the resignation of OBR Chief Richard Hughes, who says that he wants to help the organisation quickly move on from this regrettable incident. This is, of course, linking back to the leaking of the Chancellor's budget before she declared it. And The Independent has Sir Keir Starmer, the UK Prime Minister, insisting that there was no misleading in the run-up to the budget. The Independent goes on to write, with Rachel Reeves denying any accusations that she lied to voters about the state of the economy. So those are our well-briefed stories and our newspaper headlines. Love to hear your thoughts.
All right, let me begin with South Africa. In case we run out of time, I want to focus on that because there's so many different dimensions to this issue.
Yes.
The first being, where shall I begin? Some of the fallout of polygamous homes. Okay. Because the case instituted against Duduzile Zuma, the daughter of Jacob Zuma, was actually instituted by her half-sister.
Yes.
From a separate, from a separate marriage. And she did so because apparently some of her family members had been recruited by Dudu into this training scheme. So at the core of it is that Jacob Zuma formed his own political party at the last election of 2024, it was last year, in South Africa, the Mkhonto weSizwe, and since then he has continued his relations that he has with Russia, and he has tried to send some of his cadres for what he calls bodyguard training. So the deal was to send them to Russia. They get sort of paramilitary training and they come back and they're empowered. Besides being cadres of his party, they now have the opportunity to work in the security industry. That is how it's being packaged. The deal, yes. He's now written to the Russian government saying that it seems that the contracts that were signed were patently misleading, and that there was never any deal that these young men and women who were going for training were to be sent to the front line to fight against Ukraine, which is what has happened. Yes. Russia has deployed these people to go and fight in the front lines, and well, thankfully, because of the court case instituted by one of Jacob Zuma's other daughters, now it has come to light and it has become a media frenzy. But I give all this background to also chime into a topic that's very close to my heart, which is our liberation war relationships versus where they are now.
No.
Because a lot of people hold on to the sentimental relations of liberation and say that during the liberation war, it was Russia that stood with many African countries for them to be able to get independence. It was China that stood with many African countries for them to get independence. They provided weapons, they created ideology, they indoctrinated young fighters, and that's how many African countries became independent. Now, many African leaders still hold a romantic, a romantic affiliation to these relationships. And this is a reminder that these relationships have changed. The Soviet Union that was interested in emancipating African countries from Western colonization is not Vladimir Putin's Russia of 2025.
Today.
And now we see this debacle. I do hope that all of those who've been sent to the front lines against their own will and without their consent will be repatriated home, and that all involved in this scheme, unfortunately, includes the daughter of the former president, they have to be prosecuted. You can't just send people for military training without doing your due diligence.
Okay. In South Africa, there's something they call the Foreign Involvement Army Act. Under that act, you as a South African cannot get recruited into foreign army without the permission of the government. So at the level of law, these persons who have been charged to court have violated that law. The second thing is that unemployment in South Africa is 30%. For younger persons, it's also very high. So you have a lot of idle young men in South Africa who are just looking for any opportunity. And the problem is not only in South Africa, in some other African countries, Senegal, elsewhere. So you find Russia on one hand, Ukraine on the other hand, coming to Africa to recruit soldiers. They tell them, we are giving you contracts, we're promising you training. But when they get out there, they are subjected to a different kind of enterprise. They are drawn into the war. Nigeria had at the level of the Foreign Affairs Ministry to say that no country should come and recruit Nigerians to fight either in Russia or Ukraine. So it's a complex source of factors. At the Zuma family level, between Dudukile and her sister, Zuma Nkube, yes, there may be that family problem there. But at a larger scale, is that many of these poor countries, developing countries, are also invariably victims of this conflict that you have in the rest of the world. And that is why we often argue that, when there is a conflict anywhere in the world, we are all victims, as we are also likely to see very shortly in Venezuela. Now, during Donald Trump's first term, he had issues with Nicolas Maduro, who became president in 2013 and who has survived a lot of crises, including protests, including the assassination attempt in 2018, including issues over elections last year, which they say Eduardo Mundo, a former diplomat, won. But Trump is not a friend of Nicolas Maduro. But this time around, Trump, let me keep saying Trump, he say he's fighting a drug war in order to have a legal cover. Because the Caribbean Ocean and the Eastern Pacific Ocean are some of the most dominant routes of narcotics importation into the United States. The Eastern Pacific Ocean is responsible for about 74% of cocaine and fentanyl entering the United States. And so, he says, Nicolas Maduro is the head of an organization called the Cartel of the Suns. And that a president, as president of a leader of a terrorist organization, does not deserve to be there. So that's why now, the phone call they had, which was brokered by Brazil, Qatar, and Turkey, I think on Sunday, he told him to leave the place immediately and that he will give him safe passage for him and his wife and his son. Now, the question you raise is, how can one country that is equal to the other country now say the president of another country should get out or he will take him out? So the fear is about war between the United States and Venezuela. Will it get to that stage? I don't think so. Because President Trump will still need to get the approval of Congress, which is the legal cover that he will need to invade Venezuela as America did to Panama in 1989.
Exactly.
But you see, America is already covering up the Caribbean. They have deployed a lot of arsenal, over 12,000 troops, but they will need over 50,000 to 150,000 if they want to invade Venezuela. RR General Gerald Ford, the largest aircraft carrier in the world, is already stationed in the Caribbean Sea. But I don't think it will get to war. But I'm worried that Wall Street Journal, in their editorial on Sunday, in fact declared that to get Maduro out is in the national interest of the United States. So the markets will also be affected. A lot of things will be affected. As for Nigeria saying Fernando Diaz can come here, this is not the first time. We had Siad Barre here, we had Charles Taylor here, we had Yomi Johnson here. You know, so Nigeria, as part of its foreign policy, trying to ensure stability within the region. So what President Tinubu is proposing is consistent with our foreign policy. However, the PDP is saying, well, if you are protecting opposition in Guinea-Bissau, also protect opposition in Nigeria. But that's neither here nor there.
Poetic. We'll take a show. Thank you so much for that, Adefemi.